Today is Thursday the 1st. We have, I believe, 13 bills, mostly election law and some other topics. We're going to start with Delegate Guyton, and she will be followed by her panel of Josh Hamouza, Noreen Badwi, and Matt Peterson. As I look at the witnesses, I see no opposition, either oral or written, so please, advocates who are testifying on behalf of the bill, let's try to be precise and be additive since there is no opposition. This is 418 County Boards of Education, Symbols of Hate. Welcome, Delegate Guyton.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair and members of the Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee. For the record, I am Delegate Michelle Guyton from District 42B in Baltimore County, and I'm here once again to respectfully ask for your favorable support of House Bill 418, which is designed to prohibit the display of hate symbols in Maryland public schools, unless that symbol is necessary for educational programming. The educational experiences of our diverse student body should not be marred by racist hate symbols from the past. Specifically mentioned in this bill as hate symbols are Confederate flags, nooses, and swastikas. And the definition of symbol of hate in this bill is very specifically defined as an image or object that expresses animus toward another individual on the basis of race, color, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, or national origin that may be reasonably forecast to cause a disruption, so in the school environment. And that is so that we would be aligned with rulings, court rulings on this issue, particularly as determined by the Fourth Circuit Court, which includes Maryland, where it's been determined that there is no reasonable expectation of absolute freedom of speech in a school environment, particularly when it meets these criteria that I've just read to you. Just so you know, in Maryland, all 24 jurisdictions already have dress code restrictions, so this is nothing new along those routes, along those lines, and 8 jurisdictions, including Carroll County, Caroline, Howard, Montgomery, St. Mary's, Talbot, Wacomico, and Baltimore County just adopted last month for the for the 2021 school year, specifically ban one or more of these 3 symbols in their dress code currently. So for one of the first steps in true educational equity is to make sure that everyone feels safe in the school environment. And I strongly urge you to explicitly ban wearing or displaying divisive and triggering symbols of hate that disrupt and interfere with the teacher's ability to teach and the student's ability to learn by supporting House Bill 418. I do want to let you know that this bill passed committee 21-1 in Ways and Means and House 121-12 and has been supported by the Legislative Black Caucus, the Legislative Latino Caucus, NAACP in Baltimore County, Roundstown, Council on Islamic American Relations, Baltimore Jewish Council, Baltimore Women United, Maryland Young Democrats Caucus of Color, Anne Arundel, Montgomery, Baltimore City Public School Systems, and the Maryland School Psychologists Association. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I welcome anything that I can make clearer about this bill.
First of all, we're going to take the other witnesses. I didn't notice we had the Chairman Kaiser. We're going to move Chairman to you next. I apologize. I didn't see your bills. I'm sure you have a lot to do over there. So we're going to keep rolling and we'll get to you momentarily. Let's go to Mr. Mahumza.
Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and honorable senators. My name is Joshua Mahumza. I'm the current student member of the Board of Education of Baltimore County. It's a great honor to testify in favor of House Bill 418, County Boards of Education Symbols of Hate policy. I and many other students, especially those of color, thank Delegate Guyton for her steadfast support for the removal of abhorrent symbols like Confederate flags and swastikas from our school grounds. Inscribed in our student and faculty handbooks in Baltimore County and many other districts are various behaviors and actions that are prohibited, like attire that references vulgar language, gangs, nudity, and violence. What is missing in the handbooks is language that specifically addresses by name hate symbols. Many may argue that schools have policies that denounce discrimination of all kinds, and although that may be true, we still hear cases of students feeling emboldened to wear attire that promulgates hateful messages. And because such a ban is not specifically stated in our school policies, and the enforcement is not uniform throughout our counties, some districts have adopted or are in the process of adopting language that solidifies this ban. But with all that has occurred from last year's and the continued reckoning on race, it would send a prodigious message to our students and families that our state strongly condemns the displaying of these symbols in and near our institutions of learning. As a Black man living in this very polarized and racially hostile period of our time, I implore members of this committee to not only conscientiously deliberate on this bill, but also take the time when making your position to think about the pain and sorrow that symbols like Confederate flags and swastikas cause in individuals that look like me and those that don't. Author and civil rights attorney Brian Stevenson, in his book Just Mercy, wrote, "Terrorist groups like the Ku Klux Klan cloaked themselves in the symbols of the Confederate South to intimidate and victimize thousands of Black people. Nothing unnerved rural Black settlements more than rumors about nearby Klan activity. For 100 years, any sign of Black progress in the South could trigger a white reaction that would invariably invoke Confederate symbols and talks of resistance. I know that many would argue that symbols like Confederate flags are part of our country's culture, especially in the South. But for Black people, the mere sight of these dreadful symbols catalyzes emotions of heartache and causes many to feel unwelcomed in their own country. These symbols have the power to break the souls of many of our minority groups. And since symbols like Confederate flags were proliferated by those that sought to destroy the American Union, they should be fully condemned by everyone."
Thank
No
you.
student
Mr. Mahumza, you're gonna have to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, no student should ever have to see these symbols in any place other than history books and course materials when learning about the dark histories of our country. As
Thank
we
you.
saw,
Thank you. Okay, let's go to Ms. Bodway. Again, let's try and be additive if we can.
Okay, I don't think she's present. I don't see her.
Okay, Matt Peterson.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Pinsky, Vice Chair Kagan, members of the committee. My name is Matt Peterson on behalf of the Baltimore Jewish Council, here in favor of House Bill 418. The swastika and Confederate flags are two symbols that today only have one meaning, and that is hate. As a Jewish person, when I see a swastika, it brings up a lot of emotions for me. First is fear, discomfort, and then I think about just what these symbols stand for, and the history behind it, the Holocaust, the ugliness of Nazi ideology, and my own personal family history of the Holocaust. All these immediately come to mind. The Confederate flag stands for an era of slavery and Jim Crow segregation that I can only imagine what horrible thoughts that would evoke in people of color. And, these symbols, they bring up so much negative emotion and fear, and they have no place in a learning environment outside of a textbook. We can't allow them to be normalized by those who don't understand the full history and meaning behind them. We need to teach that to them. We can't just let them see them being displayed. At the BJC, we work every day to educate people about the Holocaust, about these symbols of hate, and just what happens when they spread and become normalized in society. And of course, we have far, far too many examples of this to draw on from history. We've seen an increase in hate incidents. Just recently, unfortunately, we've been reminded about hate against our Asian American neighbors and community members. But, the history is obviously much longer than that. And so many incidents we've seen of spray painting of swastikas and things like that that are perpetrated by young people that do not understand what they're doing and what real impacts and how hurtful their behavior is on people. So I just hope that this will help you understand the situation and why we need to make sure that these symbols are not in our schools any longer. So with that, I'll thank you for your time and ask for a favorable report.
Okay, there's no one signed up in opposition, so that completes the hearing on that bill. Thank you, Delegate Guyton. Let's go to Chair Kaiser. And again, Madam Delegate, I didn't realize you had a couple bills, and I know you've got to chair your committee. So where I would have taken you first. Let's go to, which one would you like to start with?
We can go in order. Start with the election law bill on risk limiting audits.
Okay.
And while I
That's a 759.
yes, I didn't
Okay.
have anyone signed up, but I did have somebody who's going to be available to answer some questions. So oh, I see someone there. In terms of thank you, Senator Pinsky, Vice Chair Kagan, and the rest of the committee. Bring before you today a bill about risk limiting audits, and I can share some further information after the hearing, but just to let people know, it's really the gold standard for ballot auditing. It uses statistical methods to confirm election results, takes full advantage of paper ballots, and it's what the experts are asking for. It's so named the risk limit because of the maximum chance that if the tabulation is wrong, the audit won't correct it. So let me explain a little further. You manually examine randomly chosen individual paper ballots or batches of ballots until you have sufficiently strong enough evidence that a full hand count would confirm the electronic tabulation. So for an example, in a race such as a state senator, if your votes differ by 1,000, that's a lot of votes. You'd probably really only have to sample about 50 randomly sampled ballots and you could be confirmed. In a much closer race, you would probably need to sample a larger number. And so this is something that could give every voter greater confidence that the election was done correctly. Ultimately, over time, we would like it to even be done before certification. And so if there were ever mistakes. I could explain further why the risk limiting audit is better than the kind of audit we do here in Maryland, but I'll skip that part of my notes. What I really want to go to is how the bill is amended. The Maryland Association of Election Officials were worried about some of the cost and other details of doing a risk limiting audit. They agree that it's the gold standard, but they wanted to have a work group first, and we agreed that that would be the best idea, and they would be much of the people on the work group. So less of a question of should we do risk limiting audits, but how would we do it? How would we pay for it? What might it entail? What are all the process pieces? Because again, it is it's the most approved method. You would have experts in risk limiting audits. You could have vendor reps. You could have our local election officials. They are quite the experts. I would add in terms of the testimony in the House, we had it from Common Cause, Verified Voting, and a good 10 other groups. Mayo wanted a work group, and I don't usually report on negative testimony, but Mako said, risk limiting audits employ statistical methods to ensure that election results match voter selections reflected on paper ballots. Mako does not raise policy objections to employing risk limiting audits to verify election results. The county concerns are merely practical and cost driven. So clearly we do need to look at some of those cost issues, but again, to have those election experts. So I can certainly answer more questions on risk limiting audits. There is an expert here who could answer some more detailed questions, but beyond that, I would thank you all for your time and urge a favorable report.
Mr. Lindeman, do you just want to answer questions, or would you like to say a few words in addition?
Oh, well, I'll just be very brief. I know you have a full docket. I'm Mark Lindeman from Verified Voting, earlier mentioned. I think this is a great bill. Delegate Kaiser raised all the reasons why risk limiting audits are the way to go. I think election official concerns about making sure that the implementation works for them are completely legitimate. I think the work group is a fabulous idea. So I see this as a great move forward for Maryland.
Okay, Senator Washington, followed by Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Madam Chair. It's good to see you. I just want to make sure. So this is a work group passed out of the House as a work group. So it's not we're not implementing it, but we're going to study it over the interim.
Correct.
Okay, and so then we'll.
By next year, so we can be ready to pass legislation to.
Okay, great. No, I think work groups are really a good way to try out good ideas and make sure we have good legislation. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Senator Ellis.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chair Kaiser, for this new terminology, risk limited audit. And being a CPA, I'm just curious. So could you take like 30 seconds? I know we have a lot, but describe what it is. I mean, what is it? Why is it? How different is it than any other kind of audit?
Certainly. With other audits, Senator, and thank you for that question, and I didn't realize you had that background. I'm a daughter of a CPA. What we do now when we do any kind of audits, you know, the current system in Maryland is that we take the picture of a ballot and then we look at the picture again, and there's concerns about whether that's the right way to do an audit. But when it comes to a risk limiting audit, you're also not deciding in advance. We're only looking at 1% or 5%, or we're looking at so many machines. You decide how many ballots you need to look at based on how close a race is.
Okay.
You determine the number of ballots needed to confirm that the election results are accurate. If during this process, if the race keeps getting closer, you would look at more ballots. Potentially, if it's between you and someone else and the vote count differs by 10 votes, it's most likely that, of course, all the votes would be recounted. But I think, you know, with statistical significance, if you beat someone by, say, 20%, it wouldn't take too many ballots to confirm everything is correct.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much. I appreciate your great explanation.
Well, thank you.
Further questions for the chairwoman from Ways and Means? Seeing none, that completes the hearing on that bill. Let's go to HB 854, Longitudinal Data System Center, including of child welfare data. Delegate Kaiser.
Senator Pinsky, thank you again, and thanks for taking me. I have still trying to approve our voting list that we're doing in the next half hour. So perfect timing. So this bill, put away your calculators, put away your slide rules, a much easier bill than the last one. There are several bills this year in the Maryland Longitudinal Data System, and this is something that I've been actively involved with for the over 10 years that it has existed. And what we're trying to do now is just about foster kids. We really don't have great detail on students, and the term used in this bill is about out-of-home placements. We don't have great data about these students, and because of that, we can't say whether we're doing a good job. We can't figure out the best practices and so forth. We're adding data elements for foster kids. That's what essentially this bill is. Because of some of the data will be coming from our Department of from the Social Services Administration within the Department of Human Services. We will be including them on the board. We'll be asking the center to look at child welfare data. There's some issues with data dashboards right now. Someone at a university can ask a big policy question and have them crunch the data, but we're also asking them to create very simple data dashboards of some usual obvious questions, and just sharing some of that information with the General Assembly. I certainly be glad to answer any further questions, but just to say, I think we don't do a great job for our foster kids across this state. I think there's so much more we can do, but good data creates good policy, and that's what we need. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I urge a favorable report on House Bill 854.
Yes, I can tell you that the chairwoman has been very strong on collecting data and using it to analyze for further policy and improving policy. Questions for her? Seeing none, that's pretty straightforward. Thank you, and I hope you have a great voting session, particularly on those bills coming from EHE.
You bet. Quite a few are on the list today. Thank you, Senator. Take care. Thank you all.
Let's go to 746, Delegate Weigel, absentee ballot envelopes, party affiliation.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Pinsky, Vice Chair Kagan, and honorable members of Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs. I'm pleased to present you with House Bill 746. For the record, I am Delegate Weigel. This is probably the easiest bill you'll consider this session. All the bill does is remove the party affiliation from the exterior of the mail-in ballot envelope. Many of us were contacted during the most recent election in regards to privacy issues surrounding mail-in ballots. And one of my most vocal constituents was an elderly lady who wished to see all of her voter information remain private, so much so to the point that she said she wasn't even going to mail it in or vote. I encouraged her to do that and told her that I would look into the issue. Originally, I had thought that I could block all the voter information exhibited on the exterior of the envelope, but after discussions with bill drafting and the election board, I was advised that much of the information is actually necessary to process the ballot while retaining the confidentiality of the vote itself. Therefore, all this bill does is remove party affiliation. It passed the House Ways and Means by a vote of 22-0, and it passed the House by a vote of 133-0. And I thank you for your consideration and ask for a favorable report.
Question for the delegate. Delegate, I have one real quick one.
Yes.
You should have paid closer attention. Is this addressing the ballot going out to the voter and returning?
Yes, it would be both, and mainly upon the return where you have to sign the exterior of the ballot. There's a lot of information on that, but the only thing that is removed here is party affiliation.
Yeah, I think we've already taken care of half of this. In one of the other election bills, going out to the voter, we removed that in one of the other bills. I think we also heard from local boards of election that knowing the party, it made their work a little quicker in terms of dividing them up and processing them when they returned. I could be wrong, but as I recall in the earlier legislation, that was one of the issues that came up. Obviously,
yeah, this is on returning the ballot, and I spoke with our local election office, and they were fine with it being removed. So,
questions? Seeing none, there's no one else testifying on the bill. Thank you for coming in the EHE today. Appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we're going to move to Delegate Ebersol 753, student organizing peaceful demonstrations. And then we will go to the Prince George's County bill. Delegate Ebersol, welcome. The delegate will be followed by Jonathan DePietro, Lauren Raskin, Jennifer Malo, and Tina Dove. As I look at the hearing list, there's no one signed up in opposition, neither oral or written. So let us please be succinct and not snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Delegate.
So please, not last on the list today, Mr. Chair. So happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on this bill. In my time as a teacher, I've been consistently impressed with maturity and awareness of the students that I taught. They're not only in tune with the policies and issues of the day, many of them are eager to participate actively in establishing and influencing policy. And one way for them to do this is through peaceful and productive demonstration. It's important in the school setting that they understand both the parameters for themselves and the school setting while experiencing the opportunity. This legislation will help to clarify to students in a consistent and predictable manner the way for them to be able to demonstrate and express themselves, helping to clear the way for them to do just that. It will establish basic guidelines to protect the educational setting for instruction and safety as well. Each local school system will be required to establish a demonstration policy for students that would allow students to experience predictable set of rules in arranging and carrying out a demonstration. Among the major points that must be honored in such a policy according to this legislation would be a definition of what's a peaceful student demonstration, as well as what would not be, protections of health, safety, and welfare of students and school personnel in authorizing demonstrations, conditions students must adhere to in terms of notification and school disruption, and protections against excessive or unnecessary punishment of students for demonstrating. Specifically, the policy shall contain times and places and manner of expression for demonstrations that are allowed, limitations on language that has the intent to harass or threaten, intimidate others. And I urge a favorable response on this legislation, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Delegate. Mr. DePietro.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Jonathan DePietro. I am a high school senior from Howard County and the student member of the Howard County Human Rights Commission. Today, I'm speaking as the director of the Maryland Student Coalition in favor of House Bill 753. In Tinker versus Des Moines, the Supreme Court solidified the judicial protections for students' rights to peacefully demonstrate in school. The 1969 ruling guarantees that students' rights shall be not limited in a public educational institution unless to preserve the safety of the environment. Federal and state courts have upheld this ruling to protect the First Amendment rights of students. House Bill 753 seeks to legislate these protections and solidify Maryland's commitment towards protecting the democratic rights of its citizens. This legislation serves the important purpose of ensuring equal implementation of the Constitution and forms mutually agreed upon procedures for students to organize and participate in demonstrations. Additionally, HB 753 will elevate students' direct understanding of civic engagement. The implementation of this legislation, which will be held by the local jurisdictions, will ensure their policies fit for their schools while securing the fundamental rights of students. In the past, I have had the ability to participate in demonstrations at my school and have witnessed firsthand the large amount of inconsistencies when it comes to the allowance for students to demonstrate and organize in many instances, and the limitations that have been done across the counties. Students continue to act with passion, responsibility, and the maturity to engage their democratic institutions to the test of speaking out. This legislation has been pushed forward by a coalition of student leaders from across the state, including with assistance from numerous student school board members and leadership from both the Maryland Youth Advisory Council and Maryland Association Student Councils. This legislation was developed with the input from administrators, educators, lawyers, and community members. House Bill 753 ensures the equal treatment of students for exercising their civil responsibilities and seeks to build political efficacy to shape the future of our democracy. I strongly urge the committee to issue a favorable report, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. DePietro. Let's go to Ms. Raskin, followed by Ms. Malo, and let's try to be additive.
Thank you. Chair Pinsky, Vice Chair Kagan, and members of the committee. My name is Lauren Raskin, a student of Montgomery County and resident of District 14. I speak before you today in support of House Bill 0753, which seeks to legalize all forms of peaceful and student-led protest on Maryland public school property. Beyond a student, I am an outspoken leader and a passionate advocate. I have devoted the entirety of my high school career to student government and politics, having the honor to serve as a delegate on the Maryland Youth Advisory Council and the advocacy coordinator of the Maryland Association of Student Councils. However, it is having this experience that I say there's only so much civic engagement experience that one can achieve within the confines of student government. As someone who has participated and served as a leader in a multitude of advocacy-related pursuits, I can attest to the impact they have on one's maturity and development. Whether it be organized walkouts for gun reform, sit-ins for achievement of educational equity in our schools, or marches for the Black Lives Matter movement, I have learned more about public speaking, interacting with elected officials, and the intricacies of our governing systems, more so than I ever have in an academic setting. The ability to engage in political participation is thereby not only a right, but an entity which will prove to be beneficial for our current student body and the future generations to come. In simplest of terms, uninhibited student voice, the principle to which this bill seeks to achieve, is unequivocally a necessity. And yet, as it stands, it is currently a necessity that is by no means being protected or fulfilled by our school systems. It is in these same school systems in which we are taught from a young age the importance of civic engagement, the sheer significance and power of peaceful activism as a means of facilitating change in our communities. The lack of protection for student voice and youth empowerment, therefore, is a vile source of hypocrisy. How can we justifiably mandate civic education in our academic institutions, and yet in the same breath, punish students for exercising what they have learned. The foundation to which this bill stands upon actively promotes the importance of preservation and encouragement of student voice, and should be passed, will symbolize the support of lawmakers in the same capacity. Members of the committee, we need you on our side. In a time in which more and more students begin to tackle issues pertaining to racial injustice, climate change, gun regulations, and more, we as a state must actively support their ability to take a stand in what they believe in a regulated and responsible manner. And
Thank
as
you,
such,
Ms.
we must
Raskin.
start now. Thank you.
Ms. Mallow, followed by Ms. Dove.
Good afternoon, Chair Pinsky, Vice Chair Kagan, and members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Mallow, and I am here as the Vice Chairperson of the Board of Education of Howard County, which has taken a position of favorable with amendments on HB 753. First and foremost, I hope to highlight the incredible work done to bring this bill before you, spearheaded by current and former Howard County students. Their research into the legal realm of student rights and their advocacy before the General Assembly is a true testament to the sheer tenacity and engagement of today's youth. We believe students should have the ability to advocate and articulate their views on topics that impact their everyday lives, whether it is racial inequities, climate change, or something more mundane like the price of school lunches. The Howard County Board of Education supports HB 753 to allow student organized peaceful protests, while also setting up guardrails on reasonable limitations for the time and place. The board has submitted written testimony which outlines specific language on the amendments we are seeking. These amendments are needed to ensure safety of all staff and students while setting clear expectations. The first would be the removal of school buses as a location where student organized peaceful demonstrations could take place. A distraction to the bus driver, usually the only staff member present, who is piloting a moving bus, could have devastating and dangerous consequences. The second is a clarifying amendment to explicitly state that students involved in peaceful demonstrations are still subject to local student code of conducts. With these amendments, we urge a favorable report from the committee and thank Delegate Ebersol for providing this important legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Dove.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Tina Dev. I'm with the Maryland State Education Association. Ernest Green, Elizabeth Eckford, and Minnie Jean Brown are three of the people that made it possible for me to stand in front of you today and to testify on behalf of this bill. They were 3 of the 9 students that put their lives on the line to integrate Little Rock High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. I had the pleasure to thank my ancestor, Ernest Green, for his sacrifice on my behalf. Diane Nash, Bernard Lafayette, and C.T. Vivian were also 3 students who literally put their lives on a bus, put it in the South so that I could be an educator. Once again, I got the opportunity to thank Diane Nash and Bernard Lafayette in person, crying through the whole process, eternally thankful for their sacrifice on my behalf. These all are student demonstrators who made it possible for the 75,000 members of the Maryland State Education Association to stand in full support of HB 753. And on their behalf, we ask for you to favorably vote out positively on HB 753. Thank you for your time.
Before I call on Senator Carrozza, let me ask the representative from Howard County, Ms. Mallow.
Yes, sir.
Has your Board of Education adopted a policy? And I guess it's a little odd to me that you want to give that authority over to the state. Wouldn't you want each local Board of Education to adopt their own policy? Are you sort of like punting it to us? And have you adopted the exact, wait, let me finish.
Okay.
Have you adopted the exact same policy you're recommending the state adopt for Howard County?
So our current policy is student rights and responsibilities, policy 9020, sorry. And it allows for some of this, but it is not a standalone policy. And what I believe this bill is doing is not so much telling us that we're punting to the state, but having the state say, yes, we believe that this policy should be in place. And within these confines, we would like a standalone policy or a policy within the subset. So
Right, but as a board member, couldn't you introduce the policy that basically replicates what's in this bill?
Absolutely. We could have that kind of local level replication. However, we are looking out for the interests of all students in Maryland. And we believe that one jurisdiction should not be limited in this way when it can be extended to the entire student populace of the state.
Has this come up in front of MABE to the other 23 local boards of education?
Yes, it has come up to MABE, but I don't know that they have taken a particular stance.
Okay, thank you. Senator Carruthers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think my questions are along the same lines. So Delegate Ebersol, good to see you again. I wanted to ask you if there had been any interaction with the superintendents at all and with the boards of education. Just I was going through the hearing file very quickly just to see if there had been some coordination since according to your testimony, this would be a requirement on the local school systems. And just given everything they're trying to do with COVID-19 and go back to in-person learning, I just wanted to see if there was some feedback at this time on your bill.
I'm sorry, I'm balancing between a voting session and my other, so I'm on two screens. I heard the end of your question, but not the beginning of it.
Okay, sure. My question was, I was going through the hearing file and I was trying to see if there was if you had any interaction with the superintendents or local boards of education, those associations, given that according to your testimony, this would be a new requirement on local school systems and given everything the schools leadership, teachers, and everybody's going through with COVID-19 recovery and trying to return to in-person learning. I just wanted to know at this time if there was any feedback from that, superintendents or boards of education.
None. I mean, except that Howard County, who interacts with me fairly regularly, is supportive of this bill. They expressed their one concern, which you're welcome to address, but they didn't have any concerns about creating a policy.
Okay, there are no other witnesses. Thank you all for your patience and testimony. Young students, thank you. You did a very great job. Your teachers are doing a great job in helping prepare you in instruction and for life after high school. Thank you. Okay, let's go into the next bill. Thank you, Delegate Ebersol.
Thank you.
Next, we're proceeding with HB 980, Prince George's County Delegation, Public Ethics Definition of Application. There is House Chairman, Prince George's Chairman, Delegate Barron. Welcome, Mr. Chairman of the Prince George's Delegation of the House. Delegate Barron will be followed by Todd Turner, Rhea Harris from the county, Adrian Gardner, and then Cheryl Court. Then we'll take questions. Then we will move to unfavorable. Anya Sweat and Sushitra Balachandran. And I also left off Trevlin Johnson, but I think they are a member of the delegation. So let's start with you, Delegate Barron. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be before you after crossover. I am introducing House Bill 980. And for the record, I'm Delegate Eric Barron. I'm appearing before you as chair of the Prince George's County House Delegation. This is a local bill introduced on behalf of the Prince George's County Council and supported by the Prince George's County Executive, the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, and a number of county and regional organizations such as the Coalition for Smarter Growth. I'm going to be very brief because we have a number of witnesses and you have a lot of business today. But I'll just summarize by saying, as amended, the bill makes a temporary definitional clarification to the Maryland Code that would allow the council to ratify an important countywide zoning rewrite, which is the culmination of a 6-year-long legislative process for the rezoning of all the properties in the county. Again, it's a local bill. We highly recommend it to you. Hope that it can receive a quick favorable report from the committee. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Chairman Barron. If you've got to go back, you can. We're going to take the other witnesses, the proponents, and then take questions all together. Either you can hang around if you want to answer some questions or defer to some of your witnesses, or if you have to go back to do other work in the House, we understand that as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, let's go to Council Member President for Prince George's County, Todd Turner. Welcome, Council Member.
Good afternoon, Chairman Pinsky, Vice Chair Kagan, members of the EHE Committee. Appreciate the opportunity to appear before you. I'll try to be as brief since you've gotten the overview from Delegate Barron. I will say this is a little bit of a homecoming for those who don't know. I started my public service career in the state Senate working for former and now departed State Senate President Miller. And the committee I was assigned to was the former EHE Committee under former Chair Sharon Splout. So it's a little bit of a homecoming. And hopefully today I don't make a fool of myself, given that it's April 1st as well. As you indicated, this bill is seeking a clarification in the state ethics law to allow Prince George's County to move forward with the zoning rewrite, which would be the first comprehensive zoning rewrite that Prince George's County has undertaken in over 50 years. It's been tried twice before, has never gotten this far. As indicated, as part of our 2014 general plan that was adopted, one of those key recommendations is that we needed a new, modern, and updated zoning ordinance in Prince George's County. Working with the Park and Planning Commission, which is our professional planning department in Prince George's County, they hired consultants, and we went through approximately about a 4-year period to update and adopt a new zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations, which was done in 2018. And I know we do have representation from Maryland Ashcopple Park and Planning Commission. It's actually Deborah Borden, who's the deputy counsel. Mr. Gardner was unavailable to attend this afternoon. And they will talk a little bit about what the public process was to get us to that 2018 legislation that the county council adopted. So that was first part of the zoning rewrite. The second part of that, since what we did in the zoning ordinance was in essence reduce from about 73 different types of zones in Prince George's County down to about 43. And so the second part of that zoning rewrite process is what we're calling our countywide map amendment process, which is a countywide rezoning of every single property in Prince George's County from its existing zone to its most compatible zone under the new zoning ordinance. However, Prince George's County is unique. We are the only jurisdiction that has a state public ethics law that requires certain disclosures as part of our consideration of rezoning and development applications. We initiated this countywide map amendment back in July of 2019, conducted a series of regional meetings and outreach into the end of 2019, and we're scheduled to do a joint public hearing countywide at the end of March of last year. So obviously we did have to cancel that meeting, postpone it, excuse me, as a result of COVID-19 and the pandemic. We did get a legal opinion from the Attorney General's office that we could do a virtual hearing. And so we rescheduled that for the end of November. However, what we discovered as we went through that process and reviewing those disclosures that are required under the current state law, members of the council, we did not have a majority to be able to conduct a public hearing back in November. And so we have postponed the hearing. And speaking with the State Ethics Commission, which has authority over this provision of state law, they suggested that we should come to the General Assembly to ask for clarification. So I do want to thank Delegate Barron and the members of the Prince George's House delegation, as well as the Environment and Transportation Committee for their passage of the bill as amended, and we do support the bill as amended. I'll leave it there to answer any questions because I know there will probably be some questions and it's probably better for Q&A. And with that, I think Ms. Rhea Harris on behalf of the office is here with us as well. Thank you.
Yeah, so I will be going to Ms. Harris next. Ms. Sweat, I have you on the list, so we're going to get to you. I didn't mention your name the first time around, but we're going to, and if one of the speakers can include, or else we'll have it as one of the questions, the relationship of ethics to zoning. The bill is one title, but it overlaps into two areas. I think clarity is going to be called for. Ms. Harris, County, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Pinsky and members of the committee. I want to introduce myself. I am Rhea Harris, Governmental Affairs Director on behalf of County Executive Angela Also Brooks, who couldn't be with us today. And I wanted to stress the importance of getting this zoning map done. It's been several decades since the County of Prince George's has had a new and appropriate zoning map. And therefore, if you don't have a good zoning map, you can't grow an economic development. And so the ethics part of it is just a small part of it, but it's more important that we get a state zoning, county zoning map that reflects what we're trying to do in Prince George's Island in the future. As Councilmember Turner said, we went from 70-some districts down to 43 or so zoning districts on the map. And it's important that we finish this process. It's been over 6 years since we started this process. True, a pandemic came in the middle of it, which delayed it for a year, but we need to get it through so that we can recover from the pandemic and economically grow. And I urge a favorable vote on House Bill 980.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. Mr. Chairman, you mentioned that Council Gardner is not here. Did you want Ms. Borden to just answer questions or speak in his stead?
Yes, I believe she was scheduled to speak in his stead since he was not able to attend.
Okay. Ms. Borden, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay, you're on.
Thank you very much. I'm Deborah Borden. I'm the Deputy General Counsel for the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. As has been said before, we have been working on this zoning rewrite project for the past 7 years. I actually started out working on this project directly, and we have had hundreds of meetings with community members, with civic associations. We've done an amazing amount of outreach on this particular project. The legislation before you is regarding the ethics requirement, which requires an affidavit to be filed for anyone who is requesting an upzoning to get a new zone during the CMA process. That request is what triggers the affidavit requirement. It's not whether or not that person has given money to one of the campaigns for any of the sitting council members. So it's the actual request that is triggering this this requirement, and that is why the issue is more than just developers. It's anybody. It's a homeowner who decides that they want to have a different zone from what they will get from the matrix that we've adopted. So this is creating a problem, and we really hope this legislation passes so that we can get our new zoning ordinance on the ground. That is the whole point of this. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We will come back to you. Ms. Court.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Cheryl Court. I'm with the Coalition for Smarter Growth. We're the leading nonprofit organization in the DC region advocating for walkable, bikeable, inclusive, transit-oriented communities and as the most sustainable way and equitable way for the DC region to grow and provide opportunities for all. We have worked in Prince George's County for many years, advocating for quality, equitable, walkable, transit-oriented development. We've advocated to direct growth around the county's 15 metro stations in inner beltway communities. We've worked to direct growth away from places that are not close to transit or job centers or public services. And we worked on both the Plan 2035 and the 7-year process to create the rewrite for the antiquated zoning regulations. The county stands at a crossroad. It must be enabled to implement the 2018 zoning rewrite in order to fulfill the goals of the 2035 plan, which focuses growth in regional transit centers. The county has a vexing problem that is resolved through HB 980. It's unique in that the ethics law restricts the county council from repealing and replacing the old zoning and putting in the new zoning through the countywide zoning map amendment. And it's urgent that we put in place this legislative adjustment. The county ethics law would prevent county members, council members from voting on this repeal and replacement, which affects 300,000 different properties and 250,000 different owners who would be affected by the countywide zoning map amendment. No other jurisdiction has such a restrictive law. Montgomery County which is unencumbered by such a restriction, has recently done the full repeal and replace of its zoning. The proposed legislation is narrow and it's only limits the county council vote to the county zoning map amendment. It does not affect individual zoning applications. This zoning modernization is critical for Prince George's County. The new zoning regulations will better support transit-oriented development and build more walkable and bike-friendly communities. The updated zoning regulations will also bring new transparency for rules that are easier for everybody to understand, and for approvals, we'll now have time limits, unlike today where these approvals are actually last forever. So in conclusion, we wanted to ask this committee to vote in favor and to ensure that this legislation is adopted before the end of the session. We feel that losing the countywide map amendment will frustrate the county's efforts to shape a more sustainable and competitive future, and will leave Prince George's behind where other jurisdictions have been able to get rid of, repeal and replace their antiquated zoning. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Court. Okay, I see Senator Kagan. Just to give context, without speaking for or against this bill, although I have my own view, I'll hold on that. Over 30 years ago, the state delegation passed a law restricting the ability to receive money from people who, would allow you to take money from someone who had business before the county council sitting as a zoning council. But if they did receive money, they had to recuse themselves of being involved in that zoning decision. So that's been on the books for over 30 years. This, while not dealing ostensibly with small projects, but a master plan, a countywide master plan, has fallen betwixt and between apparently, and it has forced people to recuse themselves unless there is some kind of waiver. So that is the context. There are nuances to the bill, as you're going to hear from the opponents. So that's sort of where we are. And I can tell you the delegation is meeting this evening at 6 o'clock to take this up. Vice Chair Kagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this bill is a little bit confusing to me. It reads simply, but I've been getting a lot of calls from people in Prince George's County. So Councilmember Turner, maybe you can speak to some of that, or we'll wait to hear from the opponents. My question for you all, in particular, maybe Ms. Borden or Councilmember Turner, I wonder if, so Ms. Borden said that we've got to get this off the ground, and yet I see that this has a sunset, and I'm wondering if it's so critically important why it is that you're sunsetting it after 1.5 years.
Thank you, Vice Chair Kagan. I'll try to respond to that. So the original plan was for us to be able to complete the countywide zoning map amendment process within about a year period. So we initiated it back again. We set forward the process and what we call the matrix, which is the way that the planning department recommended and way we adopted as the district council, how we're going to transfer these properties into the new zone that's most consistent with its current zone. So we were starting to do that process. We were scheduled to do our first joint public hearing in March of last year. Obviously, we had to postpone that. Our goal was last year to get it done by the end of 2020. So as part of the discussion of the bill on the House, we agreed and supported an amendment that would make this little clarification only for the purposes of us completing the countywide map amendment process, which we thought would take about a year. The bill is, if it's adopted, would be effective July of this year. Give us a little bit of leeway, so that would end in December of 2022 as the bill is currently before you.
And just to clarify, council member, what does the year and a half get you? I mean, so you finish the whole process and then the sunset means you can or can't do what?
So our goal would be to adopt the actual map itself within that period of time.
Yes.
Or we could not, the zoning ordinance does not go into effect until the map is completed. So in essence, if we're able to complete the countywide map amendment and adopt the map, say by the end of 2022, then the ordinance would go into effect, say in January of 2023. So we agreed that to that time limit, because that was our expectation when we started, that it would only take approximately a year for us to get through the process.
And Senator Kagan, and I think the idea is the waiver of the carve out would end.
Correct.
So it would go back to the existing law would be the driver, and this unique carve out for this process would go away. I think that's my understanding.
And Senator Kagan, the only thing I'll make one distinction, and Ms. Borden can speak to this as well, so if you want to answer your question. So unlike the traditional process where we have an individual application that comes in to review by the Planning Commission and then eventually to the District Council, where you know there's a finite number of people are involved, and if they've given you a contribution, that individual council member or council members cannot participate in any part of that process. Here it's different. This is government county initiated process as a rezoning. The difficulty here is, as we read and as the State Ethics Commission has interpreted the law, anybody who comes before us who may speak, they may like the zone they get, they may want something different, they have to file an affidavit. And if they've made a contribution, that automatically knocks out that council member as part of this county-wide process. So what we discovered, if you would just, let's be honest, we all raise money from people in our community. And so we've had people come forward who filed affidavits that make contributions that may or may not participate, or they may participate, but they may or might not ask for something different. But once that state law affidavit kicks in, then that council member is precluded from the entire process. So that's what we're trying to fix with this clarification.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I can do one more follow-up, if I could.
Sure.
Council member, I've read the bill. I read it multiple times. You just said contribution for the first time, and that's what I remember this issue coming up in the past about developer contributions. What am I missing that's not in this bill?
So obviously the bill is just a small segment of the entire ethics code. So we don't have a version of the state ethics code before you, but that's what it comes down to. If they're under the current procedure outside of our countywide map amendment process, if there's an application and there's a contribution by somebody who's involved in that singular application and they've provided it to a council member, then that council member is recused and cannot participate in any decision on that. So this process that we're talking about now is countywide. So
I understand.
Senator, let me maybe a brief summary here. Because it's countywide, so there are a lot of people, it's not a particular project. They've been hit where they've gotten a $100 donation from someone who's not a builder or developer, and that's why they had to recuse themselves and couldn't get a majority to move forward. That being said, it's about opening the door and how wide you open the door. When you open the door, does it allow for nefarious situations of a developer, even though that's not the intent? So the question is striking that balance where they can proceed with their work, but not open the door to situations where a developer or builder could try to buy influence. I mean, I'm trying to cut to the chase here.
Sure. So thank you, Mr. Chair. The bill that is before us reads like a process and not as it's under ethics, and it was described as ethics, and yet if you search for the word donation or contribution, neither word is in here. So I find it a little misleading. And so maybe that's a bill drafter issue, as council member said. Maybe, it's just not the whole section included in the snippet that we get here. But I think it's really a little bit unfair to us as we're trying to figure out the policy. So thank you, Councilmember Turner. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, further questions for the proponents before we go to the opponents? Seeing none, we're going to go to the opponents. We're going to start with Greg Smith. Mr. Smith will be followed by Ms. Sweat, who will then be followed by Sushitra Balachandran. Mr. Smith, welcome to EHE.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I had raised my hand, but
I'm sorry, Senator Patterson.
I'll wait
Please.
until the opponent finish, and then I would like to have an opportunity to speak.
Well, Senator Patterson, if you've got some questions or cross-examination for the proponents, you can do both.
Not cross-examination per se, but I'd just like to ask Councilmember Turner, are you representing the county council, or are you here on your own?
So Mr. Patterson, good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Formally take a position in support of, it was PG 41621 at the time. Now it's obviously HB 8980. So we have taken a public position of support.
The council has. Mm-hmm.
The council has, yes.
And you're representing the council.
Yeah, I'm just representing the council. I hate to say it, I've been as a member of the council for the past 6 years. This is one of the few things, I hate to say it's a legacy, but I was not able to complete that when I was chair of the council last year. So I feel an obligation to try to finish
finally,
it.
Mr. Chair, I would like to just share with the committee that we are hosting a meeting this afternoon at 6 o'clock, the senators, and this is a top priority that will be on the agenda for full discussion and perhaps maybe other amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Patterson. Let's go to the opponents. Mr. Smith, in opposition.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and committee members. I serve on the board of two Prince George's County nonprofits, Sustainable Hyattsville and Community Research. We're members of the growing grassroots alliance that opposes HB 980 in its current form. The more people learn about this bill and how the county has sought to advance it, the more they dislike both. County residents care so deeply that they've sent nearly 500 letters to their senators and placed hundreds of calls to them. And just today, they've sent you more than 160 letters. We urge you to amend and detoxify HB 980 or to issue an unfavorable report on it. Passing HB 980 in its current form would create a toxic situation where the developers and county and council may evade not only the ethics law, but also the public review process that normally applies to requested zoning changes. Our concerns and opposition are based on facts and experience, not speculation. We know that developers plan to use the shortcut CMA process to intensify zoning. Our preliminary review of affidavits and letters the council has received found more than 100 instances where parties said they planned to or might seek to intensify. Many were letters from land use attorneys filing on behalf of multiple clients and covering multiple properties. Developers seeking to intensify can use the CMA to evade the normal public review process. That process requires developers, the zoning hearing examiner, and the council to issue direct notice to the affected community. It requires hearings before a hearing examiner and in many cases the council. It requires the planning department to develop a technical report, which the planning board must publish on its website. The zoning ordinance section governing the CMA allows the developer to evade those requirements. A developer may request as rezoning on the day of the joint hearing between the planning board and council, and possibly even after it, with no public notice. In challenging a highly controversial project, Sustainable Hyattsville has documented clear or potential violations of the ethics laws by an owner, agents, and council members. The owner and agents gave what we believe to be prohibited contributions totaling several $1,000s to council members' campaign committees. Neither the contributors nor the council members filed affidavits disclosing those contributions, and none of those council members recused themselves from the case. That developer has applied for more intensive uses and densities through this CMA. If the assembly passes HB 980, those multiple ethics violations might be retroactively legalized. That's like giving a wealthy individual who has been cited several times for speeding, convincing a local agency to retroactively raise a speed limit and vacate those citations. The council has refused to publish the hundreds of letters, affidavits, and applications it has received so far. That lack of transparency cripples the public's ability and the General Assembly's ability to understand this bill's potential impacts. It also undermines the credibility of this legislative process and the council's efforts. On March 29th, Councilmember Turner told the Prince George's County Senate delegation that the council had received more than 1,200 affidavits. That's a lot, and that's a 50% increase over just a month before.
Mr. Smith, you're going to have to begin to wrap up.
Well, I'll leave it there. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm familiar with the ethics law and the zoning law, and we've brought cases before the council and the planning board before. And in fact, we're suing them in state court on 3 cases. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we will allow questions in just a moment. Tanya Sweat, please. Welcome, Ms. Sweat.
Thank you, Chairman Pinsky and senators. Thank you for having me today. I stand in solidarity with my fellow Prince Georgians who oppose this bill. I speak to you today as a lifelong public servant. I've served in the United States military, and I've also worked as a civil servant in our federal government, and I've had to live with ethic laws my entire professional career. I also come before you as a duly registered candidate for local office in Prince George's County. This is a public ethics bill. You've already said it. This is not a land use bill. This is not a zoning bill. Prince George's County is no different than any other jurisdiction in the state of Maryland, except for one thing, our proximity to the nation's capital. You've also heard testimony from those who support this bill that Montgomery County, our sister county, and the Maryland National Capital Region's Park and Planning Commission did the same thing without requesting such a change in the public ethics law. We are no different than Montgomery County, except for one thing. This request speaks volumes about some of our publicly elected officials in Prince George's County. A change in this law will result in decisions that will affect our county and our residents for generations to come, and it will not necessarily be in our best interest. This bill, if it is passed, will surrender our county to public interest instead of focusing on the needs of our residents first. Prince Georgians are prepared to wait a little while longer to get the rezoning necessary to rid us of food deserts and excessive residential development in order to make sure this is done in an ethical manner with the integrity that the Maryland General Assembly required 30 years ago. Yes, some of our elected officials accepted campaign donations from developers and homeowners, and that's well within their right. However, we ask that you not give them a pass. They should not get an exemption from laws that have been in place for a very long time. In the contrary, they should be required to follow the law that's been on the books for over 30 years. We ask you to help us hold our elected officials accountable, make them do the right thing for their constituents. We beg you, stop the pay for play in Prince George's County. Return an unfavorable report on House Bill 980.
Thank you, Ms. Sweat. And let's go to third person is Suchitra Balachandran. Please, welcome to EHE.
Thank you, Chairman Pinsky, Vice Chair Kagan, and members of the committee. I'm Suchitra Balachandran. I'm the chair of Our Revolution Prince George's. Along with 23 other large and small grassroots organizations, we have submitted detailed written testimony in opposition to HB 980. And to be very clear, while we oppose HB 980 in its current form, we do not oppose the zoning rewrite. We do not oppose the countywide map amendment, typically referred to as a CMA, that the county council and the planning board have been engaged in for the last 6 years, and it is not our intention to stop the CMA from reaching completion. In its own website, the county refers to the map amendment as a technical exercise. It is supposed to transition a property's existing zone to the most comparable zone district in the new ordinance. And again, in the county's own words, it is not intended to be a zoning grab bag for property owners. And yet it is precisely because it has turned into a potential zoning grab bag for developers that the ethics law has triggered and the map amendment process has not been able to continue to completion. I would like to tell you that as a Prince Georgian, I will be eternally grateful that the ethics law has enabled us to track the problem down, because our council has been far from transparent on this issue. The problem, as it turns out, is, as people have said before me, it's not the existing ethics law that's the problem. And the solution is not to weaken the ethics law. The problem is that upzoning applications have been filed around the CMA process. And even more importantly, over 800, maybe now 1,200 affidavits have been filed, many by developer attorneys, possibly more, explicitly indicating that their clients reserve the right to file upzoning applications. And some of these affidavits have indicated prior campaign contributions to council members, and that is why these affidavits have jointly rendered the majority of the council unable to convene a hearing. So that is the short story of what has occurred. Upzoning applications have no place in a county-wide map amendment process that is supposed to be a technical fix to the current code. And so why have upzoning applications come in? Well, the normal zoning process, the normal zoning change process includes public notification, evidentiary hearings, and clear opportunities to appeal decisions. Zoning intensification via the map amendment will bypass these checks and balances and allow in a wholesale scale what is not allowed for a single application. And that is why developer applications are coming in droves. Parcel-specific upzonings have no place in the CMA. Applications to intensify zoning should go to the normal process, special exception of the zoning map process. And that is why, as I said, the ethics law kicked in. And frankly, if these applications
Ms. Alexandran, you're going to have to wrap up.
Yes, there will be no
Time's
problem
up.
reaching quorum. So what we would like to see is an ironclad amendment that would prohibit the county council from approving any upzoning under the CMA. And failing that amendment, we ask you to oppose HB 980. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, all of the witnesses. Questions for the opponents? Questions for the opponents? Seeing none, thank you all for your patience. I know many of the very same people will be involved at 6 o'clock on another Zoom. So that being said, that completes the hearing on the local Prince George's County 980. We're now going to move to HB 1047, Delegate Wilkins, Mail-in Voting Enhancement Act. Welcome, Delegate Wilkins. Delegate Wilkins will be followed by Joanne Antoine, Janet Millinson, William Jackson, and Samuela Ansah. And as I look at the sign-up sheet, I don't think I see any opposition, oral or written. Delegate Wilkins, welcome back to EHE.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and greetings, Madam Vice Chair and the entire committee. Great to see everyone. For the record, I am Delegate Janelle Wilkins, and I'm pleased to present HB 1047, which is the Mail-in Voting Enhancement Act. I want to start by thanking your committee for your collaboration with Ways and Means on our mutual effort to expand access to the ballot. HB 1047 codifies some of the successful policies from the 2020 election. And I'm aware that the committee has already adopted one major part of the bill, which is as it relates to drop boxes and access to drop boxes. So I'll focus my testimony on other critical aspects of the bill and ask for your consideration on those. First, I would like to highlight the aspect of the bill dealing with codifying ballot tracking. Colleagues, I'm sure that in the 2020 election, like me, many of you got emails and calls from constituents asking, where is my ballot? And the tracking from the State Board of Elections that they provided where voters were able to get a notification was really, really critical. This bill codifies the ballot tracking so that a voter will receive a notification when their ballot application is received by the local board, when the absentee ballot is sent to the voter, when the absentee ballot is also received by the local board, and when the absentee ballot is counted. So I think that's something that is useful for all of us in supporting our constituents, but also most importantly for voters and being able to track where their ballots are. I also want to highlight the ballot curing aspect of the bill. You all are probably aware that local boards voluntarily conducted some ballot curing, meaning that voters were able to correct aspects of their ballot in order to avoid them being rejected. So for example, a voter who forgot to sign the oath, instead of that ballot being rejected, for them to have the opportunity to be contacted by their local board and to fix that error. So that would be codified in this bill. I want to flag the ballot drop box security aspects, which makes it a crime to remove, deface, or damage or destroy a ballot drop box. Because these drop boxes are new, we thought it was really critical to make sure that it's clear that any type of defacing or tampering with a drop box is a crime. The final aspect of the bill that I want to mention in terms of provisions that haven't been moved forward yet, it deals with reporting. So you all may have seen that the State Board of Elections did a very comprehensive report that outlined everything from the election policy changes in 2020 to voting trends, to the timeline of the election, to their outreach efforts, and had a lot of data and background information. We'll be able to look back, let's say 10 years from now, and review the 2020 election policies, and that can help inform our work around what happened and what was the impact. So what this bill does finally is that it actually makes it so that SBE would conduct that type of comprehensive report after every single election. And with that, colleagues, those are the 4 provisions of the bill that I wanted to highlight. And I appreciate all of your work on elections together over the course of this session so far, and urge a favorable report on the Mail-in Voting Enhancement Act.
Thank you, Delegate. And as you know, your amended bill passed second reader today and will be taken up either this evening or tomorrow morning, which incorporates some other bill from Senator Kramer. Okay, let's go to Ms. Antoine.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair Pinsky, Vice Chair Kagan, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Joanne Antoine, Executive Director of Common Cause Maryland, testifying in support of House Bill 1047. I'll try and keep it short and not be repetitive. You know, I think with the exception of drop boxes, the other components in the bill before you, are all changes that were needed, honestly, long before the 2020 election, and regardless of the number of voters that were using the mail-in process. In our conversations with voters that were using mail, I think navigating our tracking process has always been frustrating, even more frustrating during the 2020 election. But I think it just shows us that we need to do a better job. There's secure technology that allows for better tracking, that sends voters updates in the method that they choose. And we really should have already shifted to using these tools. We also know that voters who intend to vote by mail at times make mistakes like forgetting to sign an oath or, not including the necessary identification with their ballot. Those voters should be provided an opportunity to cure their ballot. And, again, the tracking here is critical because better tracking ensures that we can easily notify that voter in the method of their choice, letting them know that they've made a mistake. So, as we move forward with things like drop boxes, permanent lists, it's critical that we ensure voters are confident in the process. All of these components help to achieve that. I did want to flag that there is one additional piece of the bill. It's on the last page. It addresses usability. We have testimony from the Center for Civic Design. I don't think Dr. Summers from University of Baltimore got to submit her testimony, but we want to ensure that the voter is able to vote their choice, right? The way that they intend, and that our materials are up to date. So this would allow us to hopefully improve them, maybe even take a look at design. So with that, I urge a favorable report, and again, stress that these pieces are just as necessary here as we move these other reforms. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Antoine, the usability and a large number of other aspects of this were amended into the other Wilkins bill. So I think that's going to be law by the time we get to address this issue. Okay, let's go to Janet Millinson, followed by William Jackson.
Good afternoon, Chair Pinsky, Vice Chair Kagan, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Janet Millinson, and I'm representing the League of Women Voters of Maryland. As you know, about 10 times more ballots than usual were cast by mail in the 2020 general election. And although that high percentage is unlikely to be sustained, the number of Marylanders choosing to vote by mail in the future will almost certainly be higher than in past elections. This year is the time to prepare for that increase. A lot of election procedures in 2020 were implemented on an emergency basis only, however. So House Bill 1047 would put into law many of the best practices that the League recommends for voting by mail. Specifically, these provisions include ballot drop boxes designed and located to be accessible both physically and geographically. As has been said, they'll be monitored by security cameras 24/7 and emptied at least once a day according to statewide chain of custody procedures. Tampering with a drop box would be a felony. We know a lot of voters were concerned about this. Ballot tracking, so voters can follow the progress of their mail-in ballot. And as you know, these status updates were very popular in 2020, and voters are really eager for this feature to continue. Ballot curing, where the local board would contact voters who made a correctable mistake. This will minimize the number of people disenfranchised due to a careless error. And as Joanne mentioned, there's also improved usability for both online and mailed materials relating to voting by mail. Plain language instructions and a consistent design format will reduce voter confusion. And it has nothing to do with the level of education of the voters. We can get confused no matter how many advanced degrees we have. Expert design can also lead to big savings in printing and postage costs. In summary, House Bill 1047 builds on the lessons of 2020 and establishes a strong foundation for 2022 and beyond. It will make voting by mail even more convenient and secure for your constituents. The League of Women Voters of Maryland urges a favorable report on the Mail-in Voting Enhancement Act. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Millinson. Mr. Jackson.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Vice Chair. My name is Ben Jackson. I'm a staff attorney at Disability Rights Maryland, authorized under the Help Americans Vote Act. And I know that they already have addressed the Dropbox piece, but Disability Rights Maryland surveyed 20 Dropboxes during the 2020 presidential election and found a number of ADA violations. There were issues of physical placement of Dropboxes. Several Dropboxes were flush with the curb, posing major difficulties for individuals who use wheelchairs or other walking assisted devices. But in addition to that, this bill also has provisions for ballot curing, tracking, and plain language, which is extremely beneficial to voters with disabilities who may have difficulties traveling or who may be more susceptible to making mistakes on completing forms. This bill goes a long way to ensuring universal accessibility in the voting process. And for that reason, Disability Rights Maryland urges a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. And finally, Ms. Ansa from ACLU.
Thank you, Chair Pinsky, Vice Chair Kagan, Delegate Wilkins, and members of the committee. My name is Samola Ansa, and I'm the Public Policy Intern at the ACLU of Maryland. We are dedicated to advocating for the civil liberties of all Marylanders, especially their right to vote, which is why we support HB 1047. Due to the global pandemic and our shared efforts to flatten the curve, there was an unprecedented rise in mail-in voting this past election cycle. This resulted in emergency measures by the State Board of Elections to strengthen mail-in voting throughout Maryland, which was largely successful. HB 1047 seeks to codify the emergency measures of mail-in voting and improve upon them. HB 1047 creates an avenue to diversify voting methods and increase civic participation, a hallmark of democracy. Additionally, HB 1047 will provide voters with peace of mind through real-time ballot tracking, which will solidify faith in our election system and ensure it is working as intended. This bill also provides for ballot curing, allowing voters to correct their ballots if needed, reducing rejected ballots. There are multiple avenues a voter can be contacted to correct a ballot, including an accessible web portal, ensuring Marylanders with disabilities have an opportunity to correct their ballots. Drop boxes do not require paid postage, which will reduce costs that can be allocated to improving security measures, such as surveillance cameras or physical security at drop boxes. HB 1047 is a dynamic piece of legislation that increases equitable access to voting for all Marylanders, which is necessary for our democracy to continue to work. For these reasons, the ACLU of Maryland urges a favorable report for HB 1047. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ansa. The Vice Chair has a question.
Thank you so much. Question for Delegate Wilkins. Thanks for your leadership in Ways and Means and making sure that we are enacting good legislation this year. I just had a couple of quick questions.
Sure.
On page 5 of your bill, when it talks about the cost of the drop boxes on lines 24, 25, two things. One is the cost of ballot drop boxes located in the county. It doesn't say whether the state paid for them. As you know, there are some that were, for instance, the city of Rockville had its own, and it would seem a little odd for the county or the city to reimburse or to pay the state for something that the state didn't buy. So, so I wonder, we can talk about it offline, but if you can clarify whether we can tweak that just a smidge, or maybe if that's clear enough already. The second question I have for you is, because you're focused in this bill on the division of costs, I'm wondering whether we could have a conversation about the postage costs. As you know, when the governor switched from just sending out an application, the ballot, to mandating that there be an application for a ballot mailed out, then postage paid back, then the ballot itself sent out and returned. That was a huge burden on the cost that the governor did not alleviate by picking up the costs themselves. That was a problem for all 24 jurisdictions with the unanticipated cost as well as staff time. And I wonder if you would consider whether we can provide that kind of insurance policy on postage for any future change in policy that a governor, this governor or a future governor might have and might impose on the counties.
Right. Thank you, Senator. And as you outlined, that has been a major issue, and I welcome that type of clarification. So I think that wherever there are ways to clarify in the bill, that's something that I'm very open to and would appreciate the committee's work on it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, that concludes the hearing on the first Wilkins bill of the day. Let's move to number 2, and that is 1350. Campaign finance revisions. The floor is yours, Delegate Wilkins.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. For the record, again, I am Delegate Janelle Wilkins. I'm pleased to present House Bill 1350, which passed the House last year. We ran out of time, so I don't know how much the committee was able to discuss this bill. But what it does is two major things. The first, as it relates to campaign finance, is that it clarifies that a campaign finance entity, in order to make disbursements, they must be approved rather than made by the treasurer. And what that's doing is just reflecting actual reality, where oftentimes all of us have campaign finance accounts. It's not always the treasurer that is making the disbursement and the transaction. And so it just clarifies that it has to be approved by the treasurer. The major component, though, of the bill is that it ensures that campaign finance entities that are civilly liable, so egregious actors, campaign finance entities that are running into problems in terms of their finances, that they would be required to submit bank statements to the State Board of Elections. And that would make it so that there's a bit more transparency, and that the State Board of Elections has the opportunity to kind of take a peek into what's going on with that campaign account. SBE can waive this requirement after one submission of a bank account. They determine that it's not necessary, but it does provide that additional transparency for the State Board in order to make sure that accounts, campaign finance accounts that have, issues, egregious issues that we would be concerned about that are actually civilly liable, would have to submit that information. I urge a favorable report on House Bill 1350.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, pretty straightforward bill. Mr. Damaris, did you want to jump in?
No, I was just here to answer any questions or to help out the delegate on this bill here for any technical support as well.
I'm not sure if you were just shaking your head to show us your new due. Let's move on to the next bill, and that is HB 1351, campaign finance contribution through third-party payment processor and payment of expenses. Once again, Delegate Wilkins, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, again, I am Delegate Janelle Wilkins, pleased to present House Bill 1351. This bill requires that a campaign finance entity has to initiate a transfer of a contribution that's made through a third-party payment processor. So think PayPal, Venmo, Cash App would have to be transferred from that payment processor into the designated campaign account within 7 days after the contribution is deposited into that third-party payment processor. So to put it very simply, if you're using a PayPal or a Cash App or a Venmo and it's not automatically transferring into your campaign finance account, you would have to manually do so within 7 days. And the reason for that is that we are all supposed to have our main account and all of our transactions and all of the funds coming to our account should be our campaign bank account that we have registered and developed. And so we want to make it clear that within the process of our campaigns, that there is a clear standard in terms of not having money, $10,000 or, heaps of money that might be sitting in a third-party processor. So that's the reason for this bill is, again, just transparency, making sure everyone's on the same page and making sure that we all, don't make any errors that can end up landing us into trouble. So that's the reason behind this bill, and I urge a favorable report.
Okay, once again, a fairly straightforward bill. Questions for Delegate Wilkins? Seeing none, Delegate Wilkins, thank you for joining us today. We might officially name it Wilkins Day, since we love to have commemorative days. Anyway, I think you're the winner today, Delegate Wilkins. But thank you for joining us. With that, we'll go to the next bill. And that is Delegate Stewart. Yes, he is with us. This is 1058, Public Ethics, Disclosure, Training, and Use of Confidential Information. Welcome back, Delegate Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Good afternoon. For the record, I'm Delegate Vaughn Stewart. This is HB 1058. I know that you are starting to get sick of me this session, but I have great news to report. This is my final hearing before your committee, this session at least. So HB 1058 passed unanimously in the House. It has no opposition, so I'll try to be as brief as possible. I'm not sure if sunlight is the best disinfectant. Hand sanitizer seems to work pretty well too, but sunlight is certainly a good disinfectant. And this bill is about shining more sunlight into the financial disclosures of candidates, state employees, and elected officials. And it'll tighten up our disclosure process in 4 ways. First, all state official candidates would have to disclose the trade names of businesses that they have a financial interest in and any financial relationships they have with a quasi-governmental entity like UMS. Second, the bill would require that the 4 statewide elected officials plus the treasurer would have to disclose any conflicts of interest to both the State Ethics Commission and the Joint Ethics Committee. And if the commission enters into a MOU or some sort of informal agreement with the commission about how to navigate around an existing conflict of interest, the commission would be required to share that MOU with the Joint Ethics Committee. And what we're basically talking about here is that for legislators, when we have a conflict, we can just recuse and not vote on a bill. But if you're a statewide elected official, you've got a constitutional duty, for example, to deal with the budget or to vote on BPW or to do your duties as Attorney General. You can't just recuse your way out of that. And so you generally strike a deal with the with the State Ethics Commission. And so this would provide disclosure information sharing between those 2 entities. Third, the 5 statewide officials would be required to disclose businesses that they have a 10% or greater interest in, regardless of how those interests are held. The current law is 30%, and this basically gets at the issue of subsidiaries and sister companies. And then fourth and finally, the bill expands the list of state officials that get a 2-hour mandatory online ethics training, and it would now include lower profile elected officials like county sheriffs and registers of wills, as well as executive branch officials who don't currently get the training. And the idea here is that the disclosure rules can be pretty complicated. They're not always intuitive. We just want to make sure that all elected officials are trained so they can avoid any potential conflicts of interest. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I will just urge a favorable report.
Thank you, Delegate. Questions for the good delegate? Thanks. You explained it very well. There are no other witnesses. There is testimony in your file. However, you may look at that at your leisure. That concludes the hearing on 10.5.8. Next, thank you for joining us, Delegate Stewart. Weather's warming up. It's ready for some outdoor activities.
Indeed.
Yes.
Y'all take care.
Okay, thank you. Now we're going to move to HB 10.6.8. Delegate Feldmark, election law, absentee ballot canvassing, multiple ballots cast by an individual. Welcome to EHE.
Thank you. And good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, and committee members. For the record, I'm Delegate Jessica Feldmark, here to present House Bill 1068. This bill would continue a practice which was adopted on an emergency basis for this past election and would help ensure that all voters have a voice in our elections. If a voter submits a mail-in ballot and a provisional ballot, current regulations require that both ballots be rejected, meaning the voter who most likely cast that provisional ballot just trying to make sure their vote got counted ends up losing their voice in the election. So House Bill 1068 would correct this provision by specifying that the absentee ballot should be counted and the provisional ballot should be rejected. So as I mentioned, this practice was approved under emergency regulations for the 2020 general election, and it worked well. But those emergency regulations, of course, have since expired, and this bill would just continue that policy of counting the mail-in ballot and rejecting the provisional ballot. Now, one question that came up a few times in the Ways and Means Committee was, why count the mail-in ballot? Why not count the provisional ballot? And there are 3 reasons I want to highlight for you. One is that we know a mail-in ballot will be the correct ballot for that voter. Okay, there's a chance that on election day, a voter may go to the wrong polling place and be given a provisional ballot. So we know that the mail-in ballot is the correct ballot for that voter. The second reason is administrative efficiency. By counting the mail-in ballot and rejecting the provisional, it allows for the opportunity for mail-in ballots to be processed before provisional ballots are in. And finally, we don't want to create an opportunity for a do-over. Okay, this is a relatively rare occurrence, and we want to keep it that way. We don't want to invite people to, change their mind and submit a second ballot. I think it's a relatively simple bill, but it's an important piece to make sure that individuals who may have concerns about whether or not their mail-in ballot will arrive in time, or may have concerns about, did I forget to sign the envelope? Those kinds of things. If someone is concerned, here's a friendly reminder from their elected official or some other group that, on how to vote, and don't forget to sign the oath on the outside of the envelope. Well, someone may say, I don't remember doing that. What should I do? Okay, so they may go on election day to fill out a provisional ballot to make sure their vote will count because they're concerned if they didn't sign it, it won't be counted. In that scenario, if they didn't sign it, the provisional ballot saves the day. If it turns out they did sign it, then the provisional ballot ends up canceling their vote because both ballots would then be rejected. So I think this is a relatively simple change to make sure that every vote gets counted. I know the Maryland Association of Election Officials supports this legislation. Catherine Berry was with us earlier, but unfortunately had a conflict and had to leave. I'd encourage you to see her written testimony, and she did offer she's happy to answer any questions if you want to reach out to her. But I ask for your favorable report, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yeah, thank you, Delegate. I had a question or two. I see Mr. Demarinis is still on the call, on the Zoom. I'm going to direct them to Jared, and then obviously feel free to jump back in, Delegate. It's my understanding now, we don't throw out both ballots. I thought we count the first one. No?
No, we throw, if outside of 2020, because that's a special election, but in prior election years, because the canvass of absentee ballots was done after Election Day, if we had an absentee ballot and a provisional ballot from the same person, we would not count either ballot.
Okay, and in terms of this bill, I thought we had a conversation, and I thought SBE was suggesting the last ballot, the provisional, be counted. Do I have that wrong?
That might have been prior to 2020 because of issues at that point here, but with everything moving forward, it's if we're moving the canvass start date earlier, and what we did in 2020, we counted just the absentee ballot first, and that was the only one to prevent any do-overs or pulling back votes. Plus, because the canvass had started earlier, there was no way to get that ballot out from that person. So that's why.
Right. But I guess my question is going forward. SB didn't sign up on this.
No.
Did they have a preference in terms of procedurally from their experience, which makes the most sense in terms of what to accept and what to reject?
I think that it really depends on whether we start the canvass early. I mean, at that point there, if we start the canvass prior to Election Day, or if we start the processing of those ballots prior to Election Day, then you have to make it so that you have to take the first one. There is no other options, and that kind of is dictating our answer on that.
Okay. Let's have the Vice Chair followed by Senator Simon-Ayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jared, you set up my question for me beautifully, because with the currently there is no pending legislation that is alive that deals with early canvassing. And I know that some of our county election officials are worried about that. And so I wonder, Delegate Feldmark, if you are open to the idea of possibly, if the will is there, including the early canvassing so that ballots can be opened, that a ballot without an envelope without a signature can be cured. And again, referencing what Mr. Demarinis just said, and with your bill, that we can make sure that people's votes are fixed if needed, not the votes, but the mail-in, and make sure that people's ballots are included and their voices are heard.
I'm open to that. Yes, I think, to the question of which ballot, certainly for allowing the opportunity for an early canvass or even just sort of preparing the first stages of that.
Right.
That would necessitate that we take the mail-in ballot and reject the provisional. I think
exactly.
even if that were not in place, I would argue it makes sense to take the absentee and reject the provisional, because we don't want to create that do-over opportunity, right? We don't want to encourage more of these instances.
Exactly.
So, I think that is important. And I think one point to realize also is that if a voter submits 2 mail-in ballots, one is counted and one is rejected, right? So there's already that that principle there that one vote should still count, right? And so that's my primary objective with this bill, that one vote should still count. I don't have any objection to, if you want to amend some of those other pieces into it. Obviously, that's the committee's will.
Thank you. Thank you, Delegate Feldmark. Thanks for bringing this bill. And just for the record, Mayo, the Maryland Association of Election Officials, has recommended 18 days as kind of a good number of days to get them started and not to tabulate, but to start opening and processing. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Demarais, for setting that up so beautifully. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Simonero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Delegate. Just one of your statements, you said we know the mail-in ballot is the correct one versus the provisional. I guess I'm going to the security in the system. How do you know that is the correct one?
So what I meant there was the correct ballot based on where that voter resides. Okay, so it's the correct ballot in terms of it's the right district for every level, right? So it has the right races on the ballot, whereas a provisional ballot may have been provided at a polling place that was not that voter's appropriate precinct polling place.
So, and I've looked at this issue because it's a tough situation, but if you have someone, an old address comes in, somebody has your ballot, they can send it in and it's going to be accepted. There's no checks after you send it in. That person then goes to early voting or in person, says, I want to vote. They said, I'm sorry, you've already voted, vote provisional. They can show them all kind of identification, but under this, their vote would not count no matter what, correct?
So this is to make sure that a voter who submits 2 ballots that at least one of them gets counted. I think in the scenario that you're describing, if someone says they did not submit a ballot, a mail-in ballot, I believe if a mail-in ballot is received, then that individual can take that to the Board of Elections to investigate. This is not, and I'll defer to Mr. Demarais in terms of the procedure there, but this is about a voter who submits 2 ballots and making sure that
I understand that, but I think the broader question is, in that case, sure, I can go to Jared and say, man, I'm really bummed out. Somebody voted or sent it in for me, and Jared's going to tell me, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. We can look into it, but your vote is not going to count. Well, is that correct, Jared?
It has to be a legally sufficient mail-in ballot, right? So I think and Jared, you can maybe offer more, but if a voter says they didn't submit it, I would think that would be questioning the legal sufficiency.
Okay, but in that case, and Jared, I'll let you chime in here. If you have the process where you're counting the canvassing, you separate the identity from that ballot and there's no way to get it back. And maybe this law would allow you to do it. Would I be allowed to vote if I came in and said, I'm who I am, somebody else voted for me? Can I vote then?
I would say, based upon the plain reading of this law, no, because the whole point is that the absentee ballot request or the mail-in ballot request was made and then it was processed. We would honor that one first for that scenario there, which is, we also give tons of notification to the voter throughout the process for that. But in your scenario there, if a voter shows up at the polling place, they would be given a provisional ballot because their voting record status would have that they requested an absentee ballot and that the absentee ballot might have been received as well at that point. And at that point there, yes, it would be.
There's no cure, basically. You can investigate, but no cure.
Right. The state prosecutor then would get all the information and see what they can do and go after it, because that would be a person voting in the name of another, and it would face criminal or civil penalties for that.
But it's also true that if I see your ballot in the mail, I can take it, scribble your name on it, send it in, and you basically have to accept it at that point. Is that correct? You don't have any additional verifications as long as they sign the oath and all that.
Well, I would still say that's illegal.
Sure,
Let's just put it
sure.
that way, right? I mean, like, what
I'm
you just
talking about
described as a
security.
crime there. So I think, like, I don't want to, I don't want to give the impression that that is a common occurrence or anything like that that's out there. Those are still crimes that if a person then goes, I never received my absentee ballot, what happened? I guess they would be investigated just like any other crime after the fact.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
And they might also take away their pension. So besides it being perjury, who knows where it goes? And I would also say, Senator Simon Ayer, the phrase you used a few minutes ago, I am who I am. I think I recall about 30 or 40 years ago, another fictional character using that same phrase. Popeye, anybody? Am I dating anybody here?
No, unfortunately, Chairman, that might be 60 years ago.
Oh, come on. Not quite 16, Senator Washington.
Time passes quickly, Senator.
I was on it, Mr.
On
Chair.
Mount Sinai, there was somebody who said I am. So there's a lot of references.
Okay, that completes the hearing on that legislation. Thank you for joining us, Delegate Feldmark.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if you're staying, Mr. Demarinis, but you're obviously always welcome in EHE. Delegate Kipke, you've been waiting a long time. I admire your patience. Thank you for joining us today. We're moving to HB 1343, Anne Arundel County Party Central Committee's Republican requirements. I see a blank desk. Well, we can always come back to him. Are you within hearing, Delegate Kipke? Okay.
He did until he wasn't waiting any longer.
Okay. Oh, there he is. Welcome, Delegate Kipke. We're just talking about your patience.
Thank you. Sorry, I was dealing with something else.
That's okay. And
This
sitting
bill is-
through all of these bill hearings.
I actually enjoyed listening to some of your hearings today. It was great. That Prince.
You can also watch them on video.
Particularly.
I mean, if you really love them, if you
Yeah.
can't get to sleep at night, you can replay it on YouTube.
Well, I'll take your advice. Well, it's good to see you all. This bill is very simple. It was put in at the request of the Anne Arundel County Republican Central Committee. It's you should have a letter from the Senate delegation, and there's one from the House, all unanimous. You should also have a letter from the Central Committee asking for this change. Very simply, their districts, the districts that they would run in will no longer be the legislative districts. It would be the Anne Arundel County Council districts. That's so that they all have the same size districts. Right now, we have multi-jurisdictional legislative districts, which provides some of our members with very small districts. And it adds one at-large member to keep the committee at the same size that it's been. And with that, I'm glad to answer any questions.
Questions for Delegate Kipke. And you're a Republican or Democrat, anybody can ask a question. And from Anne Arundel County, you can even ask multiple questions. Oh, there's a question from Senator Simon Ayer.
Yeah, I just wanted to welcome Delegate Kipke. He's doing a great job over there. And I just wanted to note that the first time in the history of Maryland, we have the same district has the minority leaders both in the House and the Senate. And I think that's going to be for another week or so. But I wanted to welcome you to EHE.
Well, despite your youth and inexperience, Senator, I think you're doing a great job as leader.
Well, we have all these power brokers in attendance today. Any questions for the delegate? Seeing none, thank you, Delegate.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I just have to acknowledge that even though I'm a Democrat, Delegate Kipke, I recognize that as a Ronald Reagan quote.
Yep, thank you.
1984 debate against Walter Mondale.
That's right.
Okay, all right. Senator Washington might not have been born yet, but I was watching that debate. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you. Thank you, Delegate Kipke. That concludes the hearing on that legislation. And finally, the last one of the day, Delegate Smith, 1352 campaign finance reports, business contributors, registration status. Welcome, Delegate Smith to EHE.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and also thank you to Madam Vice Chair and all of the members of EHE. This shall be brief. For the record, I'm Delegate Stephanie Smith, here to present House Bill 1352. I'm hoping to receive a favorable report. This bill does two simple things. First, it requires the State Department of Assessment and Taxation, SDAT, to electronically transmit every January 15th to the State Board of Elections a list of all businesses that are currently registered with the agency, as well as a list of all businesses that have forfeited their registration in the preceding calendar year. Then it instructs the State Board of Elections to utilize this data to engage in audits or to otherwise identify any inconsistencies, particularly as it relates to businesses that were not properly registered providing campaign donations. So this is just a bill that pretty much gives a regular opportunity for the State Board of Elections to utilize data in a very efficient manner to audit and identify inconsistencies efficiently and as early as they appear in the process. So with that being said, that's what the bill does. I'm hoping that you will give this bill, House Bill 1352, a favorable report. And I do thank you all for your time.
Questions for the good delegate? Pretty straightforward. Thank you for the explanation. Seeing no questions. Magic, it's done. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Committee, I think we are adjourned. We have a voting session at 10 a.m. If you haven't received in your email a list of 2 voting lists, I think, for tomorrow. And then, as I've told a few of you, at sometime after we finish our noon session, we will have the hearing on 14 local House alcohol bills, and then you are free for the weekend, finishing up Passover, Easter, or whatever it may be. So with that, we go in at 7. I know Senator Patterson and I have a delegation at 6 to talk about the Essex/zoning bill. So thank you. We're adjourned.